Kentucky does not advertise itself as dangerous, and that has always been part of the point. This is bluegrass country, horse country, a state built around rolling pasture and limestone hills and small towns that look, from the highway, like nothing could possibly be waiting in them. People who have spent their whole lives here rarely bring any of this up unprompted, not because they have not noticed, but because none of it feels like news. It is simply the ordinary backdrop of living somewhere this green, this old, this quietly riddled with cave systems underneath every pasture you can see from the road. The bluegrass itself grows over limestone that has been dissolving into hollows and sinkholes for longer than anyone has kept written record of it. And most of what lives in those hidden spaces has never once needed to announce itself to the farms and small towns built directly on top. 13 things share that backdrop with you, counted down from the ones a visitor half expects to the one almost nobody driving through Kentucky ever thinks to ask about. 13. The black bear. Kentucky's bear population, concentrated in the rugged counties along the eastern edge of the state, has expanded steadily over the past 2 decades as animals dispersed westward out of Virginia and Tennessee, reclaiming territory that had been empty of bears for generations. Longtime residents of Harlan and Pike counties describe the shift the same way. Not alarm exactly, more a gradual adjustment to a neighbor that had simply been away for a long time and eventually decided to move back. Wildlife officials attribute most of the expansion to young males dispersing in search of new territory, a pattern that has steadily filled in gaps across the eastern coalfields faster than most residents initially expected. Number 12. The Coyote. Kentucky's coyote population has spread into every one of the state's counties at this point, urban, rural, and everywhere in between, and the animal's comfort around people has grown right alongside that spread. Farmers dealing with livestock losses treat the coyote as a routine cost of doing business in this state rather than a crisis, the same steady, low-grade concern their fathers dealt with and their own children will likely inherit. Wildlife officials note that Kentucky's coyote population has proven remarkably resistant to control efforts precisely because the animal adapts so readily, filling in any gap left behind almost as quickly as it opens. 11. The bobcat. Once pushed to the margins by habitat loss, Kentucky's bobcat population has rebounded significantly enough that sightings near suburban tree lines no longer surprise anyone who spends real time outdoors here. The animal remains almost entirely uninterested in people, preferring to vanish into brush at the first sign of a human presence, and the handful of documented conflicts each year involve small pets left outside overnight rather than anything resembling a direct threat to a person. Kentucky fish and wildlife biologists tracking the population's recovery describe the bobcat as one of the state's quieter conservation successes, an animal thriving again in plain sight while attracting almost none of the attention its larger, more dramatic neighbors receive. Number 10. The timber rattlesnake. Kentucky sits at the western edge of Appalachia, and its eastern counties share the same timber rattlesnake population found throughout the mountain range further east. This is a patient, slow-moving snake that relies almost entirely on camouflage against leaf litter and rock outcrops, and most bites in Kentucky happen not because the snake was aggressive, but because someone stepped or reached within range without ever registering the pattern in front of them as anything other than shadow and stone. Wildlife biologists surveying the state's remaining timber rattlesnake populations describe the species as remarkably reluctant to strike, even when directly threatened, often choosing to freeze completely, still rather than reveal its position, a strategy that works so well against most predators that it occasionally works too well against an oblivious hiker as well. Number 9. The copperhead. This is the snake responsible for more bites in Kentucky than any other species, common across nearly the entire state and disturbingly comfortable in the exact spaces people spend the most time: wood piles, garden beds, the edges of mowed lawns backing up to tree lines. Its coppery, hourglass pattern blends into dry leaves so completely that most victims never see the snake before the bite happens. The venom is hemotoxic, painful, and tissue damaging rather than immediately life-threatening. And Kentucky emergency rooms treat a steady, predictable count of copperhead bites every warm season, nearly all of them from people working in their own Y yards. Longtime gardeners here will tell you the same thing without much drama attached to it. A heavy glove and a careful glance under any board or stone left sitting on bare ground for more than a day is simply part of the routine, not a precaution reserved for special occasions. 8. The cottonmouth. Confined mostly to the wetlands and river bottoms of western Kentucky, the cottonmouth is the only venomous water snake in North America, and its willingness to stand its ground rather than flee, opening its mouth wide to display the pale interior that gives the species its name, has built an outsized reputation relative to how rarely it actually bites anyone. Most encounters happen when someone paddling a canoe or wading along the Mississippi and Ohio river bottomlands gets closer than they realize to a snake that had simply been sunning itself on a log. Herpetologists studying the species in western Kentucky note that the defensive open mouth display, the exact behavior that earned the snake its name and its reputation, is almost always a bluff meant to end an encounter without a strike, not an announcement that one is coming. Number 7. The black widow spider. Every unused shed, stacked woodpile, and undisturbed garage corner across Kentucky offers exactly the stable, low-traffic habitat this spider favors, and the bite itself is often small enough to go unnoticed at first. The real warning sign tends to arrive an hour or two later, as cramping spreads outward from the site with an intensity that has sent more than one otherwise healthy adult to a Kentucky emergency room, certain they were experiencing a heart attack rather than reacting to a spider they never saw. Firewood carried indoors without a second glance remains the single most common way a black widow ends up somewhere it was never invited, riding along in the narrow gap between stacked logs the entire way from the woodpile to the fireplace. Number 6. The brown recluse spider. Kentucky sits comfortably within this spider's established range, and unlike the black widow, whose bite announces itself through pain almost immediately, a brown recluse bite frequently produces no sensation at all in the first several hours. The venom is necrotic, breaking down tissue at the bite site gradually, and by the time a wound starts to visibly worsen, the spider itself is long gone, tucked back into whatever undisturbed closet, boot, or stack of folded laundry it called home in the first place. Kentucky emergency rooms treat a wide range of severity in these cases, from a bite that heals with minimal intervention to one requiring extended wound care, and physicians here consistently point to the same complicating factor: patients who waited days to seek treatment simply because the bite never hurt enough at first to seem worth the trip. Number 5. The yellowjacket. Late summer across Kentucky brings a predictable, sharp rise in yellow jacket activity, and unlike bees, which sting once and retreat, a disturbed ground nest can produce dozens of stings from the same aggressive colony within seconds. These nests are the real hazard here, easy to step directly into along a mowed field edge or a wooded trail without any visible warning at all. And Kentucky's rural clinics see a steady late-season stream of patients who triggered a nest and were stung repeatedly before they managed to get clear. Landscapers and farmhands working the same properties year after year describe developing an almost second sense for the telltale hum of an active nest, a skill that mostly gets learned the hard way through a first encounter nobody forgets. 4. The feral hog. Kentucky's feral hog population has expanded significantly over the past 2 decades, driven largely by illegal releases for hunting purposes that wildlife officials have spent years trying to reverse with limited success. These are not the same animal as a domestic pig escaped from a farm. Feral hogs in Kentucky routinely exceed 200 pounds, travel in defensive family groups, and will charge when cornered or when a sow perceives a threat to her piglets, a combination of size, aggression, and tusks capable of inflicting serious injury in a matter of seconds. Farmers dealing with crop damage in the affected counties describe the animal with a specific kind of frustration reserved for a problem that keeps outrunning every solution tried against it so far: traps, hunts, and fencing, all producing only temporary relief before the population rebuilds. The final 3 entries trade brute force for something considerably smaller and considerably harder to notice coming. 3. The Lone Star tick. Named for the single white dot on the back of the adult female rather than any connection to Texas, This tick has expanded its range dramatically across Kentucky over the past 15 years, and it carries a genuinely strange consequence beyond the usual tick-borne illnesses. A bite from a lone star tick can trigger an immune reaction to a sugar molecule found in red meat, producing a delayed allergic reaction, alpha-gal syndrome, that leaves some people unable to eat beef, pork, or lamb without severe symptoms hours after the meal. Kentucky allergists report a steady rise in confirmed cases, and the diagnosis frequently comes only after months of unexplained reactions that nobody initially connects to a tick bite from the previous summer. Patients describe the same disorienting pattern almost every time. A burger or a plate of barbecue that had never once caused a problem before suddenly triggering hives, stomach cramping, or worse hours later, with no obvious explanation until an allergist finally asks the one question nobody thought to volunteer, whether they had spent any time outdoors in tick country recently. 2. The raccoon. Kentucky's raccoon population thrives in both rural and urban settings, denning in attics, chimneys, and abandoned outbuildings with a comfort around human structures that most residents simply accept as background noise. The real risk is not the animal's temperament, which stays largely defensive rather than aggressive, but what it can carry. Raccoons remain one of the primary rabies vectors in Kentucky's wildlife population, and state health officials field a steady stream of exposure reports every year, most involving a pet that cornered a raccoon in a yard rather than any direct conflict between the animal and a person. Wildlife control operators working attics and chimneys across the state describe raccoon removal as one of the most routine calls they take, an animal so thoroughly adapted to human structures that most residents only notice it once the scratching in the ceiling becomes impossible to ignore. And that raccoon detail matters more than it might seem, because it sets up the one animal on this list that almost nobody driving through Kentucky ever thinks to consider at all. Number 1 is the BAT. Kentucky is cave country in a way most other states simply are not. Mammoth Cave alone stretches for hundreds of documented miles beneath the state's surface, and it represents only the most famous entry point into a limestone landscape honeycombed with sinkholes, hollows, and smaller caves scattered across dozens of counties, nearly all of them home to bat colonies that have used this terrain for longer than any human settlement above them. Bats themselves are shy, beneficial animals, consuming enormous quantities of insects every night, and posing essentially no threat to anyone who simply leaves them alone in the dark spaces they prefer. Cavers and wildlife biologists who spend real-time underground in Kentucky's cave systems will describe the bats themselves with something close to affection, an essential, quietly remarkable part of the ecosystem that keeps the state's insect population in check far more effectively than anything humans have ever engineered to do the same job. The danger is not the bat's temperament, it is rabies, and the specific way a bat can transmit it without a person ever realizing an exposure occurred. A bat bite is small enough, and a bat's teeth sharp and fine enough that a sleeping person can be bitten and never wake up, never feel it, never find a mark the next morning that looks like anything worth mentioning to a doctor. This is not a hypothetical risk invented for the sake of a good story. It is documented, repeatedly, in exactly the kind of quiet, unremarkable household moment that never makes the news. A bat found fluttering near a crib, a child's arm with nothing visible on it at all, an adult who assumes a small scratch came from the family cat rather than considering the animal that had actually been in the room. Kentucky health officials have documented this exact scenario repeatedly enough that the standard medical guidance in this state has become unambiguous. If a bat is found in a room with a sleeping person, a young child, or anyone unable to reliably confirm whether contact occurred, rabies post-exposure treatment is recommended regardless of whether a bite is visible, because rabies is almost universally fatal once symptoms begin, and the window to prevent that outcome closes long before any symptom would ever appear. This is not a rare event in Kentucky's cave counties. Wildlife rehabilitators and public health workers describe the same call coming in with quiet regularity every year. A family finding a bat inside the house, a small scratch nobody thought twice about, A child who mentioned something upon waking that an adult almost dismissed as a bad dream, only to reconsider once the bat itself turned up in a curtain fold the next morning. The treatment itself, when started in time, is highly effective and far less dramatic than its outdated reputation suggests. The actual danger has never been the treatment. It has always been the gap between an exposure quiet enough to go completely unnoticed and a disease serious enough to leave no real margin for waiting to see what happens. That is the real shape of the thesis this whole list has been building toward. Kentucky's danger was never loud. The bear and the copperhead and the feral hog earn the ordinary caution people who live here have folded into daily life without treating it as a warning worth repeating out loud. The bat earns almost none of that instinctive caution because nothing about a small, quiet animal roosting in a cave that has looked the same for thousands of years suggests it is carrying anything at all. Kentucky was never hiding this from the people who live here. They already know their caves, their coyotes, their long green summers, in the same unhurried way they know everything else about this place. The same way they know exactly which counties still flood every spring and which back roads turn to mud before anyone bothers posting a warning sign. The list was only ever for the rest of us. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe for more stories like